The work of human rights defenders, members of legal defense teams, or those accompanying victims of human rights violations leads to meeting and getting involved with numerous difficult situations. Collecting testimonies or making claims involve listening to stories that are often dramatic, unfair, and of course emotionally charged. It also involves confronting impunity, difficulties of investigation, lack of political will or means to seek justice or reparation. In addition, many people and organizations involved in victims of human rights violation have to confront also their own security problems or even threats to their daily work. All of these difficult situations means that the care of people and teams must be part of the dynamics of the organization of personal care and of the work agenda. It's not something that we cannot take care of. It's central. To understand a bit better how the political violence and how working with human rights violations affect us, we are going to make a brief description about different types of impact that this situation may cause in teams working in human rights violations. So the following categories are generally used to talk about the impact of stressing the helping professionals or the struggle of human rights defenders. Day-to-day stress, cumulative stress, organizational stress, stress related to suffering and death are some of them. We're going to go one by one. So one, day-to-day stress. It is related to the pace, the volume of the work, the frustrations, the daily difficulties of litigation and work with the victims of human rights violations, or with all the demands and bureaucracy that all this work brings with. Cumulative stress can manifest in different ways in different people. It can be, for example, concentration difficulties, stiffness, thinking about certain problems all the time, not being able to think out of it, inability to assess or to take decisions. Drug or alcohol abuse and risk behaviors may be other kind of manifestations. Organizational stress. Also, the organizational aspects, the amount of internal work and the energy required to keep an organization running, performing or responding to financing projects, all the bureaucracy, etc., can be a very, very big source of tension and stress. We call this organizational stress, and it has to do with the factors associated with the way to get the job done. Most of the attorneys or organizations in human rights have more or less complex organizational structures, a mandate that includes their actions and a definitions of role and tasks. This may help to reduce some sources of tension and also helps to have some clarity on the task. But sometimes the demands of a threatening context, in some cases, the complexity of the task, managing the amount of information, the organizational demands of the reporting or the bureaucratic work in the face of pressing needs to take a case, there are also all of these frequent cases of stress and conflict. So some factors of organizational stress can be, for example, the hierarchical distance and the limited autonomy for decision making. When people lose the ability to control their own actions, the decisions inside the organization about what to do and what not, always depending on the decisions of others, and they also have concrete responsibilities on the action, they do not feel involved or in a collective way. This may lead to a loss of the meaning on the work. The bureaucratic work environment with excessive regulations and procedures may also be a big source of stress. The administrative work, of course, is important in order to strengthen the group or carry out the projects or the cases, but sometimes the formal aspects and the bureaucratic procedures can be excessively regulated and may lead to an overload that lead us to lose the right direction or the priorities in the work that we are doing. A third example will be conflicts with the mandate, that it's the definition of our task and type of work sometimes could be very rigid and sometimes very ambiguous both are negative because it gives a space to discussion between which kind of task we must commit to and until which point we should be supporting the survivors or not. And sometimes people will think this is way too far from our mandate, and other people will feel in the organization that doing less is being not committed at all. So that may create conflicts inside the organization. So it's very important to be sure that we share, we discuss, and we actualize the mandate related with the situation that we are living and that we are working with. Some key aspects to prevent organizational stress are clarity in roles and responsibilities, as well as participation in decision making that involves everybody with their knowledge, their capacities, their previous experience, and the periodic evaluation of the organizational dynamics. Another type of impact when we are working with these human rights violations, it's of course confronting ourselves with pain and extreme situations. Confronting situations of extreme poverty, pain, death, mistreatment, injustice is part of the work of human rights defenders, but can also lead to greater levels of stress and anxiety. There are several ways in which these situations can affect us. Vicarious trauma occurs when the person supporting is severely affected by the experience of the victim that we are working with. On the other hand, countertransference phenomena may occur. The impact that the victim's story has on their own problems or experience of the person that is making the interview. For example, hearing about rape or grief over the loss of a loved one can lead to the person who is listening to connect with their own experience of abuse or loss. You have to be aware of these phenomena when they may occur to assess the need for support, limit the type of experience that we are going to be confronting with, be aware of our own limits, or to also be able to ask for help when needed. In any case, you have to try that these phenomena do not interfere in the relationship with the victims or the lawsuit judicial procedure. At other times, the person may be also affected by their own fears in handling situations with victims. For example, you may have had a negative previous experience or dealing with cases that were very difficult. So we might find ways to talk about this, to be aware about this, and mechanisms to support and manage these difficulties and to have more tools from a psychological point of view. In some cases, we can be facing very serious situations, such as experiencing critical incidents, threats of death, extreme violence as a consequence of our human rights work. In these cases, the assessment of safety aspects, establishing some support mechanisms are basic elements of the response in these situations, must be assessed specifically for each case. You must avoid both the victimization of this person by, for example, overprotecting or limiting their capacity for action, or you need also to avoid minimizing the danger. Some recommendations for organizations working in contexts of violence. The more ambiguous and complex a task is, the more important it is that the group have a proper representation about it. Therefore, it is important that the objectives arising from the mandate are clear and explicit, and above all, are shared by everyone on the team. We need to be sure if our main task is to make advocacy, to directly support the victims, to make networking, or if we're going to do all of them, for example. But needs to be clear and discuss which are these main tasks and which are the priorities of our organization. The teams must have an adequate organization taking into account both the task to be carried out, following, for example, an efficiency criteria, Also, the context conditions, the political environment, the security measures that we must take, and of course, the sense of work and or action. This is working about internal ways of ensuring the coherence and participation of everybody. Teams must develop a capacity for mutual support and resistance in difficult situations. For this, we must learn how to take care of relationships among group members. When a climate of trust and acceptance is achieved, people can help each other. Some practical tips for building mutual support. One is to make explicit the problems or issues that affect the individuals of the group to avoid misunderstandings and blockage. It is better to talk about problems or difficulties between all, although sometimes it's very painful to pretend that they do not exist. So, for example, we may be feeling in disagreement about how we have been dealing with a survivor, or we have different opinions about a political aspect that it's relevant to our work. This may create tensions and distance between us, and it's important that we find a way to talk about everything so it doesn't split us or it doesn't create distance while we are working in human rights advocacy. Second is to put the issues and the difficulties that we have in a treatable place. It is not about getting out of trouble as if it were a hot potato, but to put them in a common place so that everyone can contribute their point of view. It's important to open the space to a constructive and a collective discussion. 3 is to take time to collect the experience of each person to reconstruct the meaning and the joint vision of our organization. If this place is not given, sometimes because we are running with so much work and we don't have the space for this, there is a risk that the group can lose the vision, the common vision about the main goal and the internal cohesion. Human rights organizations must take into account that taking care of the internal dynamic is part of the agenda, since it also depends on the sense of action, internal coherence, and ability to work. Some of these mechanisms can be, for example, 1. The creation of spaces for communication and evaluation of the group process. 2. Carrying out also informal or creative activities that allow another type of relationship outside formal discussions or formal meetings. 3. It's also important to find the space to share feelings and experience in moments of particular impact. For example, after periods of very high stress, difficult audiences, difficult moments or perception or failure, all this is important to be recognized and shared from a perspective of mutual support. It's also important to create an environment that facilitate the acceptance and recognitions of hidden feelings. For example, when we feel guilty because we feel that we are not able to do enough for a victim, for a survivor, feeling that we have been failing on how we should be working, the feelings about being so tired that we do not want to continue, the mistrust, the loss of hope. All these are feelings sometimes very difficult to recognize by human rights defenders, and we must create an environment that facilitates that this kind of hidden feelings can be shared, normalized, accepted, also in order to overcome them. Mutual support can always help to improve the stress management and contribute to give more meaning to the experience. Also, it's important to make goals flexible and reorganize the way of working or making decisions when this is necessary.